Long story short, when a kid tells you to do a burnout, you do a burnout. And well, you just hope the tires are smoking and not the clutch. In this case, I think it's going to need clutch. Because when we built this car and it put down nearly 440 to the rear tire, I told Josh with the stock 10 bolt, especially since we put 410s in it and made the gears a little bit weaker, that if the tires ever hook up or have more grab than what the clutch does, then either the clutch is going to go out of it, or if the clutch does have grab and the tires grab, the rear end's going to go out of it. And it's kind of a coin toss on which one was first. And it turns out that the clutch lost. The stock LS1 clutch was never designed to hold that type of power. And for the power that he's making, an LS7 clutch is borderline. I would put an LS7 clutch in a Corvette if it was making that type of power, but not really in an F-body. And that's just because of the weight differences. So what we're doing right now, since this has the nice tick short throw shifter in it, we really need to take these bolts out, pull this block out. That way when I drop the transmission out, it doesn't rip this boot. This should just wiggle off. There we go. Not sponsored by Tick, but if they would, I would definitely take another one of these, because my 97 SS that I'm restoring definitely could use it. Well, we're done in here. Time to get this thing up in the air and then try to fight this exhaust. This exhaust has always been a nightmare from day one, just trying to get it to fit. I finally got it to fit pretty decent. I was happy with it. And now I gotta take it off again. Fantastic. I really hope this works the way I think it should, but probably not. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Huh? Well, that never happens. Okay. Well then, not to be negative Nancy, but something else is gonna go wrong. And I'm leaking transmission fluid. I think what we'll do, since the fluid's so dirty, we're just gonna pull it out right now. Oh, right there. I'm in a mess. I'm actually kind of surprised with how dark that fluid is with no more miles than what's on this car. Next thing that needs to be done is we gotta get all this wiring unhooked from it. And I say all this wiring like it's a ton. There's hardly anything. I think it's like 3 plugs, but still, gotta get them undone. Speed sensor. Need to get this bolt off that's right above it so we can open up that clamshell and slide that torque arm out. Now you gotta be kind of careful when you're taking this out, because this torque arm can really spring up and really wedge your hand in there. Just like that. I'm going backwards just a little bit because I want to take this reverse locking solenoid off. I typically wouldn't do it, but most of the stuff that comes in here has tunnel mount torque arms. You don't have to worry about the torque arm putting pressure on it or pulling it around that solenoid while you're pulling the transmission out. There we go. I mean, it's just held in there with an O-ring and one single little 13mm headed bolt. Most of the time I leave the transmission cross member on it. Today we are not going to, because we're working around this Y pipe. So we're going to take this nut off of the center transmission mount. We'll get the transmission jack under here, right on this, take the pressure off, and then we'll go ahead and remove that. Before we go any further, we should probably put this ratchet strap around here. Safety first, especially when this thing's over 6 feet in the air. I dropped a 480E off this once. Fortunately, it was mine. Not a good deal. For time's sake, I went ahead and loosened these up. There's a bell housing bolt for the block side that's at the very top, the peak of the bell housing. And that one's about nearly impossible to get with the transmission still hooked up to the bell housing. So we're going to separate the bell housing from the transmission, slide it back, and then we should be able to get to it. We're going to lower it down a little bit. Too fast. We're going to take our plug out. We don't need it anyways. There's no fluid left in it, except what was on the plug that just got all over my hand. Down. So right up here, this is that top bell housing bolt I was talking about, and it's just tough to get to with transmission in the car. Hold on. Oh, you stop it. There we go. Maybe. There. Well, should we see how bad it is? You might notice I'm kind of working in a star pattern on this. you've never done a clutch before, if you watch these fingers here, these pressure plate fingers, as I'm unscrewing it across from each other, they're starting to come out. So I try to do them pretty even, otherwise it puts us in a pretty big bind. It should be all of them. Yep, disc is loose. Well, let's check out what we have here. Well, the first thing I notice, it has ARP flywheel bolts in it. The second thing I'm noticing is, yes, there's a lot of hot spots through here, and that's pretty toast. But if you look at the top, it has no hot spots hardly. And actually, rubbing back and forth, you can hear all the machine grooves. So this alone tells me that the disc wasn't applying pressure equally. And then what these aftermarket flywheel bolts tell me is that this isn't the original clutch. Someone's already put a clutch and flywheel on it. Let's flip this over, see what we got. Well, that's interesting. You can see that this rivet's been hitting. Actually, all four of them were hitting, even by that spring. So something's been going on here. Actually, this might be our problem. These fingers where this has been hitting, this disc should be kind of angled down. And you can see these hooks right here. I'll see if I can flip it over. See those hooks through there? Those fingers are supposed to be sitting in those hooks. And the only way that comes undone is if these were compressed way past throw and those were hooked in. What that is for basically an auto adjust on the disc. So a fresh clutch should have these all the way in. So this just was never hooked up. So that's what that SAC means. LUK, SAC means self-adjusting clutch. So I would say that this was probably manufactured wrong from the get-go, because there's no way you can get those fingers out without compressing this down in a press. That's unfortunate. Nothing we can do about it now other than replace it. The good news is that flywheel had some ARP hardware. What we're gonna put in this is a Monster S. These clutches are made to order, so it took a little bit to get it here. What we got here. Got our instructions to figure out our shim height if we need one, from the bell housing to clutch and from the slave to the front of the transmission. And that's very green. So what we got in this kit here is a speed bleeder kit. This is really nice, especially when you're a one-man show. We also went with a brand new slave with the Monster billet support. That's what that green is in there. That's a billet aluminum support, so it's not nylon. It cannot melt with high heat. Now I went ahead and purchased a build alignment tool for this. I just did a 5th gen a while back with the McLeod, or McLeod, however you say it, and fought it with the plastic tool that came with it. I wasn't gonna do that again, so I went ahead and bought the billet tool. There's our shim kit, so we can make sure we get our slave cylinder set up right. New pilot bearing, gonna need that maybe. So there's our clutch and flywheel assembly. With this clutch, I did not go with a lightweight flywheel. I went with a standard billet flywheel. This thing might even weigh a little bit more than what a stock one does. There's a couple reasons I did that. The main reason I did not go with the billet aluminum flywheel and I decided to opt for this billet steel full weight flywheel was drivability, plain and simple. With an aluminum flywheel, with a giant cam and a stock cubic inch engine, you're gonna get a lot of chatter and a lot of drivability issues, most likely. I've had some that drove fantastic, but I already know this car likes to surge, and we had a little bit of chatter even with that factory clutch. So we went this route just to make it a little more driver friendly. Got that new rear main seal up in there. We're gonna slide this flywheel on. Like so. So I'm just gonna torque these. I usually torque these in 3 stages. I'll start off with like 50, 60-ish, and then go up to 75 or 80, whatever the ARP spec is. I'll look it up in just a second. Perfect. Was that easy? We'll get this all cleaned off, put the pressure plate on. And while I'm thinking about it, I'll go ahead and wipe down the pressure plate. Now, if you haven't done a clutch install before, you'll see that this is painted green right here. And then on my pressure plate, there's also a spot that's painted green. And we're gonna go ahead and match those up. I need to make sure that that's gonna go in and out of that pilot bearing nice and free. I'll have to read their instructions, but typically I don't Loctite these, mainly because there's gonna be so much pressure on it from this that it's almost like a lock washer and they don't come undone. At least in Monster's instructions, it did not say to use Loctite on these, so we're not going to. It does say to torque them in a sequence 20 foot-pounds to 40 foot-pounds, then to 52. So we're on our second pass right now at 40. And then after that, we'll do 52. Now we gotta grab our bell housing, throw that on. That way we measure our clearances to make sure we set up our slave cylinder right. Okay, we're on the dowel pins. Now you don't have to do it this way, but typically I do not put these in until after the transmission's in. I don't like the weight of the transmission hanging on the oil pan whatsoever. So we're gonna put all the ones up here in and torque them to about 40 foot-pounds. Here's where the important part is. We have to measure to the tip of these fingers here. I'm gonna give you a quick rundown how I get my clearances. So I ran this parallel right here across the fingers. Then I put a straight edge across the bell housing. And I used my caliper to measure the space between these two. After I measured the space between those two, I subtracted the thickness between these. This was wrong. You actually need to add the thickness of the flat on the pressure plate. So the first thing I do is I remove my spring from the slave cylinder. Then I go ahead and collapse the slave cylinder all the way down. Then after it's collapsed, I take my straight edge. I make sure it sits flush against that. And then I measure the distance between the face of the transmission and here. And then, of course, I subtract the thickness of what I'm measuring with. So what I ended up with is on the bell housing to the clutch fingers was just over 2 inches. And then the next clearance was 1.927. And then when we subtract those, we get 78 thousandths. Now Monster says they like an 80 thousandths gap, like to see no less than an 80 thousandths gap and no more than a 100 thousandths gap. So now all I have to do is replace the bleeder that's on that slave cylinder with this Monster one, the speed bleeder, and put it back together the same way it came apart. The car's back on the ground. I just had to roll it back and torque the rear wheels. I actually had to put some rear brakes on it and parking shoes for the e-brake. Anyways, this is actually take 2. I had to pull the transmission in a second time. It's all on me, it's my fault. I'll tell you about it in just a second when we take this thing for a test drive. Long story short on this, I put the clutch in wrong. It's an honest mistake. Evidently I just didn't have my head on right when I did it. And instead of subtracting the width of the parallel that was on the clutch fingers, I needed to add it. And that's because the caliper should have went deeper into the clutch housing or onto the clutch fingers. Instead, that parallel was stopping the caliper from going as further. So I needed to add 125 thousandths on it. So anyways, since my gap was pretty close and I just needed to add 125 thousandths for that parallel, I needed 125 thousandths shim. Put the 125 thousandths shim in it, and it should be better. It was driving really well. The problem is it would not go into gear on a wide open throttle shift, and that's just because I wasn't able to push that pressure plate in far enough at high RPM. Either way, it's fixed now. It didn't take too long to pull it out a second time. Luckily, the bell housing didn't have to come off, and it was just as simple as pulling the transmission back, pulling the slave out, adding a shim. So it's driving really good now. I'll test it with a little bit of a pull here, and then we'll go from there. So moral of the story, doing a clutch in one of those isn't all that bad as long as you have a couple universal sockets and, well, a super long extension. And, well, those long tube headers and that Y pipe made things extremely easy. If you have to pull off the stock exhaust, it's kind of a pain in the butt. Coming out soon will be the next episode of the 97 SS Resurrection. Yeah, that car that's been sitting out in a field for 20 years that we're gonna save. And also, I have a pretty cool old ride that's coming in for a nice swap. So be sure to like and subscribe, comment if you will, and I'll see you in the next one.